research associate at CSPR. We are a newly founded research center in Pakistan working towards bridging the gap between academia and students of social sciences. We produce a series of articles and discussions on current social and political issues of the region. In this regard, we have a session called the Foresight, where we conduct interviews and get expert opinion on matters of international relations. This is why we have invited you today.
So yeah, I'm based out of Pakistan. I'm based in the Middle East. I'm a corporate lawyer, by profession at the moment. I'm working with an international law firm. So let me just run you through my educational background. I did my undergrad from Michigan State University in the U.S. Then I did my law from Pakistan. I had an option of staying back, but I chose to come to Pakistan, do my law. Then I was in between my law studies. I got offered an internship with the president of the International Criminal Court in The Hague. I was the first Pakistani to get that internship.
That's
I was
wonderful.
working there for 6 months. Then, luckily, I got a full scholarship to Harvard Law School in the USA.
Yeah,
This was in 2006. And I did my law from there. Had an option of staying back in the US or moving somewhere else, and I wisely chose to come to the Middle East. I've been here for the last 13 years. I'm a legal director in one of the top 10 international law firms in the Middle East. And I've had an interest in international law from the first day of my legal career. I've written a lot on international issues. I also make guest appearances on TV talk shows. Um, and I'm also currently teaching some law courses in Turbat Law School online, which is part of the Inspector General Frontier Courses initiative to educate the youth of Pakistan. So this is what I've done, and this is what I'm doing at the moment. And Kashmir happens to be one of my core areas of interest. I've written extensively on Kashmir, specifically from the perspective of the ongoing sort of war of narratives that we see between Pakistan and the rest of the world. I would say, not only India. And so yeah, I mean that's my introduction.
okay, thank you
You
so
can
much.
proceed with the questions
Yeah.
now. Yeah.
As you mentioned, one of the recent topic of our discourse has been the Kashmir issue, and we can greatly benefit from your expertise. I'll just start with the most basic. What is the status of Jammu and Kashmir under the international law?
Right. So, for whenever we talk about Kashmir, we have to go back in history to 1947. Uh, at least from a legal perspective, to understand where the matter originated from, and what were the seeds of dispute at that time. So Kashmir was a princely state. It had an option of acceding to India or Pakistan, as was the case with other princely states at the time of partition. Due to a Hindu ruler at that time, Maharaja Hari Singh, who deposited an instrument of accession with India. Jammu and Kashmir ended up going to India, although this was a violation of the will of the people, because if the people were to decide their fate, then they would have ended up with Pakistan, and Kashmir would have come to Pakistan. So at the time that Maharaja Hari Singh made the decision of acceding to India, of course, this was not acceptable to Pakistan, and the matter was then taken subsequently because of the war that broke out between the two countries. They were, allegedly by India, there was a tribal incursion from Pakistan. India took the matter, specifically Nehru took the matter to the United Nations Security Council, and that is when the matter became an international dispute. In subsequent resolutions, the United Nations Security Council called Kashmir a dispute. It became an international dispute at that time, and the resolution that the UNSC asked for was through a free and fair plebiscite as per the will of the people. And it was the people of Kashmir who would decide where they wanted to go, whether they wanted to go to India or they wanted to go to Pakistan. And then this dispute continued. India reneged from its promise to conduct a plebiscite. Subsequent resolutions also mentioned that India will not alter the status of Kashmir. Any alteration to the status would be contrary to the Security Council resolutions. So basically, since 1947, we have what we call an international dispute between India and Pakistan. in regards to Kashmir. And then, historically, then we had the Shimla Agreement of 1972, in which India and Pakistan agreed to bilaterally resolve the matter. But at the same time, the Shimla Agreement referred to the fact that it will be without prejudice to the position of the parties, with regards to Kashmir, which means that the Shimla Agreement did not supersede the UNSC resolutions. So Kashmir remained an international dispute. India tried to dilute it down by calling it a bilateral matter. It was not a bilateral matter then. And then we came to 5th of August 2019, where India abrogated Articles 370 and 35A of the Constitution and created two union territories of Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh out of pursuant to that action. It was an illegal action as per Pakistan, and we firmly hold to that view that it was not permitted under the ambit of the UNSC resolutions, even under the Shimla Agreement for that matter. And what India did was a blatant violation of its obligations under the UNSC resolutions. So this is sort of like a synopsis of the matter. I mean, we start from an international dispute. Then come to Simla, where the parties agreed to resolve it through bilateral means without prejudice to the fact that it was an international dispute. And then 5th of August 2019, where India committed an act of unilateralism, and it violated the UNSC resolutions, which clearly mentioned that any future of Kashmir is going to be determined by its people, which is going to be done through a free and fair plebiscite.
Exactly that. So coming to occupation in international law, how does India's control over Kashmir falls into that category?
Yeah, sure. See, there are several laws that apply to Kashmir, and a lot of people, when they talk about Kashmir, they sort of view it from a specific prism. So I'll just run you through the different laws that apply in Kashmir. Uh, First of all, when I called Kashmir an international dispute under the UNSC resolutions, I mean to say that Kashmir is subject to the norms of public international law. When I say that, I mean as follows. Number one, Kashmir is a territorial dispute between India and Pakistan because under the UNSC resolutions, Kashmiris had an option of either acceding to India or to Pakistan. Now that was the position in 1940s when the first resolutions were passed. Now, this is from the territorial perspective. From the people's perspective, because you have to understand that territory is occupied by people, and the rights in relation to a territory can never supersede the rights of the people. So from a people's perspective, even in 1947, the Kashmiris had the right of self-determination. Now this is from the people's perspective. So this all comes under the umbrella of public international law. So you have territory, you have people. Now, if you look at the other laws, we have what is known as international humanitarian law, which is the law of armed conflict. It talks about the conduct of war, how you are supposed to conduct, actions during times of war. Now, this law applies when there is an armed conflict. There is conflicting views about whether or not Kashmir qualifies as a situation of armed conflict. Although there is at least Pakistani jurists do take the view that Article 3 common to the four Geneva Conventions, which is Geneva Conventions comprise international humanitarian law, does apply, which requires that you have to protect the civilians, you have to distinguish between combatants and civilians, and you have to give certain minimum, guarantees to the people who are, civilians, and you have to conduct the war in a certain way. Now, this is international humanitarian law. Then there is another body of law that derives from international humanitarian law, which is known as the international criminal law. The biggest manifestation of that is the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. So we have a permanent court which prosecutes parties who violate international humanitarian law. The example I gave you of Article 3 common to the four Geneva Conventions, where you conduct war in a way which results in civilian casualties. You do not give certain protections to the combatants, like for example, against illegal detention, against summary execution. So this comes under international humanitarian law, which is part of international criminal law. Then there is another law that applies irrespective of whether or not there is an armed conflict, and that is international human rights law. Now, that does not require any armed conflict. It does not require a bullet leaving a barrel. It does not require a certain threshold of armed conflict. All it requires is fundamental freedoms that have to be given to people, and it applies across the board in every country in the world. So these are the different laws that apply to the Kashmir situation. So the law of occupation that we are talking about, from the perspective of protecting the civilians, protecting them from the harms of war, the law of occupation would of course come under the umbrella of international human rights law, but it also comes under the umbrella of a violation of public international law, because UNSC resolutions are binding on India, Pakistan, and Kashmiris, which means that India's action of occupying, Jammu and Kashmir, whatever part they have, is a violation of public international law also. And also, this is a violation of the right of self-determination of the Kashmiris who do not want to stay with India. They have always said that they want to have the right to choose where they can go. And therefore, these are the different umbrellas of the law that apply to the Kashmir situation.
Okay, as you mentioned, the humanitarian law is the basic law. So why we have seen in Kashmir Indian brutalities and what are they doing over there? So it is clearly documented all the oppression. So why are not sanctions imposed on India by the international community in the light of this?
Right. See, you have to understand something that when it comes to law, uh, law in writing or law as written is different from law in fact. So the theory is different from practice. Uh, in my experience, in the last, I would say, in the last decade or so, uh, the rule of law, international rule of law, has been corroded to a significant extent by politics. So countries have political interests. They want to pursue the path that is the most beneficial for them. Now, India's violations are egregious, they are blatant, it is for the world to see. But but the world has been slow to wake up to this reality. And therefore, India is not being subjected to the same standards that would perhaps apply to some other country which did not have as much a political clout as India does, or economic clout for that matter. So you see, the legal rule of law, the international rule of law is always compromised when it comes to real politics, when it comes to personal interests. Therefore, we do not see the application of international law in a uniform manner. India's violations are there for the world to see, and yet the world does not react. Now, the other thing that I have been talking about in the past few, I would say at least in the last 1.5 years, more forcefully, is that, as I mentioned to you, that Kashmir is both territory and people. Now, when it comes to Pakistan, our traditional stand has been that Kashmir belongs to Pakistan. We hear the slogan Kashmir Banega Pakistan. Now, this is looking at it solely from the prism of territory, because we are talking about territory, and we are also telling the world at large that Kashmir is a part of Pakistan, it's a territory that belongs to us. Now, I told you before that a territory is only meaningful when you look at it from the perspective of the people. A territory means nothing if you don't consider the people. Now, Pakistan's traditional stand has been that we should always focus on territory. But what is more important for Pakistan is that Pakistan should, refocus the world's sort of, focus on the people, the right of the people to self-determination, because Pakistan's territorial claims, to a great extent have been prejudiced by India in the last 73 years, because India has claimed that Pakistan has committed, acts of terrorism against, India. So India has sort of, this poisonous narrative has been, sort of drilled in the minds of the world. So when you have these kind of narratives that have built up against you, I call this a fossilized narrative. It has become like a fossil. It's become old. It's in the global psyche. Now it cannot be undone in 1 year or 2 years or 3 years, or perhaps it can never be undone. Also, what Pakistan needs to do, and this will again benefit not only Pakistan but also Kashmiris, is to harp on the fact that more than territory, this is a matter of people's right of self-determination. So instead of focusing solely on the territory, we should focus on the people. When we look at it from the people's perspective, then then it becomes a matter of concern for the international community. Then we can draw parallels between Kashmir and East Timor and other successful rights of self-determination movements. So this reorientation of thinking, this recalibration of our mode of thinking is also very, very important if we are to succeed in this war of narratives.
Thank you. That was an interesting take. This reminds me of the fact that you say it is different on paper as in reality. So, coming to
Yeah.
Pakistan and the recent FATF grey list, what would it mean for Pakistan if we are blacklisted? Is would be the same as in on paper as in reality?
Oh, well, FATF is a very politicized body, I would say. It's an intergovernmental organization, but it's a very politicized body. Um, I've written extensively on FATF, and only recently we got a reprieve. We got an extension for a few more months before our case is going to be reviewed. If I understand correctly, we now have fulfilled 21 out of 27 conditions of FATF. Uh, See, this whole FATF thing is partly because of Pakistan's fault and partly because of the fact that FATF is a very politicized body. Now, India had been gunning to grey list Pakistan, and they were hoping that they would blacklist Pakistan also because of two fundamental areas where they were claiming Pakistan had failed. One is combating financing of terrorism, which is known as CFT, and anti-money laundering, which is known as AML. So they were hoping that they would be able to sort of blacklist Pakistan, but although they have not succeeded in doing so, they have managed to keep us in the gray list. Now, again, this is because of Pakistan's mistakes, as I said, and also because of India's political clout and the fact that the world powers also do not trust us, and they don't consider us to be sort of if I may use the word, I mean, as responsible a member of the global community as some other country. Now these are perceptions. These perceptions don't change overnight. We have to really work hard to change those perceptions. I personally believe that for the first time in our country's history, we are actually having capable leadership which is trying to steer us out of this. It's not going to be easy, it's not going to be overnight, but it will eventually, inshallah, happen. And in the case of FATF, the theory of the law is the same as the practice, because here the world's interests are to sort of pressurize Pakistan, arm twist it, and to sort of make it realize that it needs to change its course of action, and they are doing it successfully so far. But hopefully we will get out of this gray list. And regarding getting blacklisted, I don't see that happening, because we do have 3 or 4 very solid votes in the FATF, which stop us from getting into the blacklist. And these are, I believe, Malaysia, China, Saudi Arabia, and another country, Turkey, of course. So these are the countries that. So you need, I think, 3 votes of countries to stop you from going into the blacklist. So in that sense, we are not going to get into the blacklist. And if we do, God forbid, the consequences would be dire for us, because once you get blacklisted, they basically sever your financial lifeline, basically, and that is something we can't afford, and we will not, inshallah, let that happen. Also, the question is not about whether we will get blacklisted or not. The question is, when do we come out of the gray list? I think we have made commendable progress, not as fast as we should have, but then again, that's Pakistan for you. We are slow to wake up from our slumber, and we don't act fast sometimes, as fast as we should. But things have moved towards the betterment. We have been ticking the right boxes. We've ticked 21 out of 27 boxes. So hopefully, inshallah, in the next session or so, we should be able to pull ourselves out of FATF. And once that happens, things will definitely change for Pakistan's economy, because all the IMF loans and all these different conditionalities that attach to Pakistan's economic whatever Pakistan is asking economically, those things get impeded because of the fact that we are still on the fat of the list.
As you mentioned, the Pakistani leadership. So, what about the
Yeah.
current leadership? How its policy towards Kashmir is different from the previous government? And if the government were to change, how would it affect our policy towards Kashmir?
All right. So let me say this much that you know, for the first time in, I would say, Pakistan's history, we have actually taken a very solid stand towards Kashmir. This happened after August 5th, 2019. Um I would attribute this to partly to our, recalibrated thinking better in terms of solutions, but also to India sort of cutting its own feet to fit the shoe. So, our sort of, fortune is equally the result of our efforts as well as India's own follies. So if India had not done article abrogation of Article 370 and 35A, we would not have gotten the opportunity of maligning them and making them look, or showing the world their true face. So part of it is our own efforts, and part of it is India's own stupidities, which they continue to commit thanks to, Modi and his, cohorts who've been, doing all the damage to India's credibility, which was painfully built up over the last many years. Now, Prime Minister Imran Khan's speech in October last year or September last year at the United Nations General Assembly, I think was a watershed event in Kashmir's history from Pakistan's perspective, because for the first time, a leader made out a very solid case as to why Kashmir is, in India's actions in Kashmir are threatening the rights of the Kashmiris, as well as thrusting India and Pakistan, two nuclear armed countries into a possible war. So he did the heavy lifting. He sort of, paved the way for Pakistan to make out a case for Kashmir, unlike anything that had been done in the past. So that much happened. After that, I think where we, sort of did not do our job well was to sell our narrative to the world at large, which we should have done after Imran Khan's heavy lifting. Because you see, a world leader who goes to the United Nations General Assembly and makes a passionate speech about something, that is stage one of the process. Then it's up to your foreign office to sort of, map out the countries where Pakistan has soft power, what Pakistan needs to do to sell its narrative, build up support of the international community, and then, as I've been saying for the longest time, and then frame a question on Kashmir in the United Nations General Assembly and make the United Nations General Assembly refer the Kashmir question to the International Court of Justice for an advisory opinion. Now, what happens is when you refer a question to the International Court of Justice for an advisory opinion, it is not binding. It has political momentum, because if the International Court of Justice was to say that Kashmiris have the right of self-determination, and that India and Pakistan, the Azad Jammu and Kashmir and Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir should have a plebiscite, in that case, what will happen is India may refuse to do it, but India will look even worse in front of the global community because the International Court of Justice has passed an adverse opinion. So these are the steps that Pakistan should have taken by now, in my view, to highlight the Kashmir issue and to take it to the next level. So in a way, Imran Khan's speech paved the way for Pakistan's lawfare, Pakistan's strategy. But post that, I see there has been a lull. Pakistan has not really pleaded its case as well as it should have. By now, we should have taken the matter to the United Nations General Assembly, uh, obtained a resolution of the majority of the countries to refer the matter to the International Court of Justice, and hopefully, and then hoped for a favorable decision to us, or at least to the Kashmiris, so that this thing could have, gained some more momentum. It unfortunately did not happen for whatever reasons best known to the policymakers.
Okay. I think the same question applies to India. BJP doesn't come in power in the next term, so what it would mean for its policy towards Kashmir?
Well, first of all, I don't think BJP is going anywhere anytime soon. I'm not a political scientist, but knowing how the wave of fascism has sort of, swept, across the world, and India in particular, I don't see them going anywhere. Not because people don't oppose them; it's because people don't see an alternative. and that is happening in many countries in the world. In Pakistan also, those who support Prime Minister Imran Khan say that we don't have an alternative, even though they may disagree with some of his policies. I don't see them going anywhere. But if they do go away, if the BJP does lose the next election, um, I can't really predict which way this will go, but I do feel that Congress would not have taken the steps that these BJP, the government has taken towards Kashmir, which is it started from the abrogation of Article 370 and then, abrogation of Article 35A. Uh, possibly they can restore Article 370 and 35A and then come to Pakistan and on the negotiating table and resolve this amicably. And that, I think, would have been the best way forward for resolution of the Kashmir dispute, because at the end of the day, Pakistan is bleeding resources fighting on the Kashmir front. Our entire focus in the last 73 years has been to protect ourselves from an aggressive India. India's focus has been on, Pakistan. They may deny it, but they don't look towards China. They have been focusing on Pakistan for the past 73 years. Both the countries have lost, tremendous amounts of finances, men. There's poverty on both sides. So the only resolution of the Kashmir dispute is through, negotiations and coming on the table with an open mind and, and resolving this matter. And again, the resolution has to be in accordance with the wishes of the people. You know, if we think about it from the territorial perspective, India may say that the territory belongs to us. Pakistan will say the territory belongs to us, but that will not solve anything. It is the people who have to be the starting point of the discussion. It is the people who will decide which way this goes. So to answer your question, there is hope if Congress comes into power, but I don't see them coming into power.
We talked about people, we talked about governments of both the countries. What about the non-state actors? Where do they align in the Kashmir issue, the use of proxy groups by both the countries?
Right. You see, when it comes to non-state actors, again, they are an offshoot of the injustices that have been done. If I am a Pakistani, I would most certainly say that, these things would not have happened if India had resolved the matter amicably, and India did not. India made a promise to the United Nations that it would conduct a plebiscite. It did not conduct a plebiscite. It reneged on its promises. Till date, we have not seen the actual instrument of accession. Some people say it's been obtained fraudulently. So all these non-state actors that have emerged out of the Kashmir imbroglio are a result of the injustices. So again, I mean, when it comes to any sort of resolution of the Kashmir dispute, you cannot sort of, these non-state actors are obviously going to have to be a part of any sort of a debate, any sort of a discussion on Kashmir. You cannot sideline them, because the moment you sideline any non-state actors which have embedded themselves in the system, then the result is, attacks on civilians, and, and they will try to put their weight, and they will try to come in the limelight because they also have interests. So at the end of the day, if Pakistan and India come to the negotiating table, it has to be Pakistan, India, and the Kashmiris, and it should include all the non-state actors, so-called, who are part of the freedom struggle. Because unless and until they are made a party to the dispute and their views are heard, we are not going to get anywhere. Because as I said earlier, it's a folly to think of Kashmir only as a territorial matter. It has to be looked at it has to be looked at from the perspective of the people. And when I say people, I don't mean only a civilian living in Baramulla. I also mean a person who has picked up a gun and who's claiming that his family has been wrongly killed, or his family, whatever wrongs have been done to his family. He has an equal voice in this. So he or she or the group has to be heard completely.
So basically, the main focus should be on Kashmiris and their right to self-determination.
That's right.
But in this context, we see proxy groups operating in the Kashmir, from the side of Pakistan and from the side of India as well. So, do you think there is a way Pakistan can justify proxy groups under the international law?
No, Pakistan cannot, because the international landscape has changed. And as much as it is a genuine freedom struggle of the Kashmiris, international law as it exists today does not allow any such activities by any country. Pakistan claims that it is not conducting any proxy wars. There is nothing being done, and I'm pretty confident that Pakistan's position is based on truth, because Pakistan is not conducting any proxy wars, unlike what we did in the past in the 90s when the Kashmir freedom struggle had gained momentum. And at this in this time and age, you cannot indulge in such actions, because at the end of the day, this is exactly why Pakistan's case has been weakened over the years, and that is exactly what I said to you. India has been successfully able to sort of weaken Pakistan's case on Kashmir by claiming that Pakistan used to support the Kashmir, used to indulge in Kashmir through proxies. Now, this is something Pakistan has done in the past, and Pakistan should not do again. And I'm pretty hopeful that Pakistan is not going to do it again. This is a world in which battles are not fought through the gun. They are not fought through missiles as much as they are fought through the legal argument in courtrooms, in international forums. You have to sell your narrative. You have to show that you're coming with clean hands. You have, good intentions. You are a responsible member of the international community. Times are gone when you could indulge in proxy wars and get away with it. This is a different time and era, and I'm pretty sure Pakistan has realized that. And besides that, frankly, at the end of the day, it all depends on how deep your pockets are, how well you are doing economically. When you're strong, economically and financially, then people come and fight your wars. Look at the case of Kuwait. When Saddam attacked Kuwait in 1990s, the entire world came to fight on behalf of Kuwait. So, it's very important to strengthen ourselves economically, and then, these all these issues will be resolved, quicker, once we do that. So, our focus should be on, betterment of the people, the economy, instead of, thinking about proxy wars. They will not get us anywhere.
Thank you so much for that. I think that concludes our session. Thank you so much for joining us again and for this
My pleasure.
discussion. I hope we can further collaborate with you in the future.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Take care. Bye bye.